Hey guys, all right, 2 more chapters. We're going to read half of chapter 16 today and half tomorrow. Remember, the pirates had just lost the battle with the Lost Boys, and the Lost Boys had fallen asleep on the ship. And they were going to head back to the Darlings' house in England. Chapter 16, The Return Home. Everyone woke up early the next day. It was a very long journey back home, and the sea was quite rough, so the going would be slow. With slight alterations from Wendy, the pirates' clothes fit the boys just fine. Pants cut off at the knees and jaunty hats and eye patches, the scowls they added themselves. Peter, of course, was the captain. Nibs and John were the first and second mates. None of the boys had any training in sailing a pirate ship, but they pretended they did, which in Neverland is always enough. As they worked securing jibs and sheets and all sorts of other sailor words, they sang and cheered heartily. Finally, they got the ship out to the open sea, let loose her sails, and started for England. It was time. Peter had decided that they would sail as far as the Azore Islands and then fly the rest of the way. He stood at the wheel and addressed his crew. "You scum," he cried, "you mangy dogs, there will be no mutiny on my ship, or else." The boys knew that Peter was only pretending to be a pirate, but, unlike them, he couldn't always tell the difference. He was even wearing Hook's old clothes, and so they laughed, but nervously. Let us leave the boys on the boat and travel back to the Darlings' home. It seems a shame to have neglected it all this time, but Mrs. Darling wouldn't have wanted us to focus on her, when we could instead be keeping an eye on her little ones. It would serve those naughty children right if their beds were not made and their room was all dusty and their parents weren't home, having forgotten all about them. Of course, this is not the case, and this is the kind of thing children count on so they can have their adventures. The only difference from when they left is that Nana is no longer chained. Mr. Darling could admit when he was wrong. The second the children had flown, he had invited Nana back into the house where she had stayed. Then, however, he had done the most unusual thing. He had gone down on all fours and crawled into Nana's kennel himself. Mrs. Darling had begged him to come out, but he said, "Not until my children come back." Every morning the kennel was carried with Mr. Darling in it to the office and then back again at night. This is my punishment, and it is proper, he thought. Given how much he cared about what other people thought of him, it was a hard punishment indeed. People laughed and pointed, peering inside, and became known as the Darling in the kennel. The true beauty of his sacrifice, however, was shown through. When the public learned why he had confined himself to Nana's kennel, they began to follow him, not to laugh but to praise. Girls asked for his autograph, and society types invited him to dinner. In his kennel, and black tie, of course. Kennel, one headline in the papers read, "The new good form." It was what he had always wanted, and yet Mr. Darling could not enjoy his new status in the community. Mrs. Darling was sad as well. When she managed to fall asleep, usually in the chair by the fire, she would dream of her children. This night was no different. Tonight, however, let us whisper in her ear that her children are on their way home. But perhaps we should not, because she was wakened with a start, calling out their names. There was a chill in the air, but the Darlings would never dare close the window. It must always stay open for the children. Little do they know that at this moment there was someone at the window. It was Peter. He had flown ahead with Tinkerbell. Tomorrow, part 2 of chapter 16, The Return Home.